Mental health is your thoughts. It's the thing that the brain produces. Brain health is about the actual organ of the brain and what is making that work or not work. Are the roads free and clear, or are they full of clutter? Are essentially the stoplights working, or are they not working? It's really that simple. The human body is absolutely fascinating. A lot of the things that you do that are good for your body either aren't good for your brain, or they don't make it into your brain to be able to help out. So ability to have things, nutrients, right, that will cross the blood-brain barrier to allow the brain to heal, to allow the brain to actually work well at the chemical level. Those are the things that we need in order to actually have mental health. Because you can't have mental health, the organ of your brain is not healthy in the first place.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 87 features Nic McKinley, a former Air Force Pararescueman, CIA intelligence officer, and serial entrepreneur, along with Christian D'Andrea, a filmmaker and entrepreneur. They are the co-founders of GoPills, an optimized formulation of 8 clinically supported nootropic NeuroChargers. We talked about how brain health drives mental health. Welcome. This is Veteran Made.
All right, testing this out. This is kind of fun. So, quick note here before this episode starts. This will be the first episode sponsored by a product, and it's the product that we feature in this episode, GoPills from Military Nootropics. The code is VM15 at checkout, and there is a link right down here for those watching, and a link in the show notes for those listening. You'll start to see some more sponsored content from GoPills. I am a customer, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and it has certainly helped me quite a bit. And long-term brain health, long-term mental health, and overall health is very important to me. And so I only platform products that are clean, products that I use, and products whose ingredients are ones that I want in my body, and that actually work for me. So I've been using the product here for about a month, and I have seen cognitive improvement in performance, and I'm excited to see how the long-term health benefits play out. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
All right. Good afternoon, Nic and Christian. Welcome to Veteran Made.
Good to see you.
Nic, welcome back. Christian, welcome for the first time. I'm hydrated. I've eaten clean. I've worked out today. Most importantly, I've taken my GoPills. So I am ready for this episode.
Look out, world.
Yeah, you look extremely sharp.
Thank you. It's my new haircut that I've taken my wife's hints very seriously about which haircut she likes, and so I'm gonna be on this track here for a little while. Diving right in, would love to a brief primer for the audience. Obviously, Nic, some folks know you, but from a different venture. So would love if both of you could briefly introduce yourselves and your backgrounds, and then we'll jump into some questions about GoPills.
Yeah, let's do it. Christian, take us off.
So I'm Christian D'Andrea. Good to see you, Nic, and meet you. It's a pleasure. I watch your podcast and enjoy it. So it's nice to be on it. So my background is originally, it's a funny origin story. I was a documentary filmmaker. I was a producer for Tarantino and Bender back in the day. And then I was researching a film at one point, went onto a base, saw that what they did on the base was extraordinary, decided to make a documentary, made that documentary for Discovery Channel. And while I was making the documentary, I saw a bunch of guys eating stuff that I didn't think was very good. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not a nutritionist, but what you guys are eating is pretty low grade and it's filled with trans fat, and trans fat kills you, essentially. So why don't I try to make something better? Long story short, my brother and I petitioned the Pentagon ceaselessly for some time. There were a lot of no's. Then eventually there was a yes. You guys can come help try to innovate and improve troop feeding specifically energy bars right out of the gate. So that's where all of this was born, my interest in supporting soldiers in a number of ways in my career, but particularly with respect to nutrition, right? Because if you're a deployed soldier and you're downrange, you don't really have the capacity to go shop a shelf at a grocery store and pick the best item. You eat what you're given. And so the operating principle at that point was, let's make sure what they're given is at least fundamentally healthy, and let's try to make something better for them. So that's where the working with the military and nutrition began. And it's been an obsession ever since. Just that idea of high performance people. How do you fuel them? What best fuels them? And there are a lot of elements within the military that work in nutrition. Some are outstanding, and those are the ones that I'm interested in, and those are the ones that we've worked with closely. And over the years, I've been tracking nootropics, right? So if it's about human performance, there are lots of ways that food and supplements can boost human performance. And nootropics is trendy, nootropics is edgy, and I've been watching, waiting, analyzing, doing a lot of reading of clinical journals, and it got to the point where I felt that the data was sufficient. There was a critical mass of data with respect to efficacy and safety on a key suite of nootropics that I call the NeuroChargers, and that it was time to launch. It was time to launch a product in that space. Hence the birth of GoPills. That's the short version. You'll learn more over the course of the episode how it all came to be and what it is, but that's the origin story.
Amazing. Thank you. And so before we dive into all of that, and I have some questions and a place that I want to start, Nic, your background as it relates to nutrition, performance, and supplements and nootropics here.
Yeah. So for the few people who didn't hear your podcast with me last time, the cliff notes are Air Force Pararescue turned CIA special agent for a number of years, turned founder of Deliver Fund and a bunch of other companies. And so for me, the nutrition focus really for the first time in my life really started in pararescue selection. When I was in high school, like all children of the 90s, I was pretty much living on Taco Bell and Mountain Dew. Right. So that was pre Red Bulls. If Red Bull would have been around, I probably would have drank 4 or 5 of those a day. So my nutrition was absolutely terrible until then I got to PJ selection, and suddenly that was very relevant to my life. The ability to perform for, 16 to 20 hours a day. And so I started to pay attention to it, but it was a lot of the kind of what I call the hocus pocus nutrition, right? The stuff that's really good for your body, but not necessarily good for your brain. There was a lot of talk about like chromium percolinate and, we would take Rippets and all kinds of really, quite frankly, stupid stuff, or not Rippets. What was it called? Rip Fuel. That was the thing back then, right? Literally had ephedra in it. And so there were so many things that we started taking that were just not good for you. And Christian actually said something earlier that was pretty funny to me. He said that I was basically a walking nootropics experiment. And so I got into the nootropic space because I ended up with some traumatic brain injury from the stuff that I did in pararescue and also at the CIA. And when I became a team leader, I realized that I was going to need to start really focusing on brain health, which is different than mental health. And a lot of people don't think about that. And so I'd done all of these things to really increase my physical performance through my entire career, but I hadn't ever really done anything to start improving my mental performance. So then that turned into starting looking at brain training and whatnot. But just like with all training, right? If you suddenly start going to the gym, you're going to start thinking about feeding your muscles from the work that you did at the gym. And it was the same thing on the brain health side. I was doing these brain performance training programs. I was getting exhausted, like need to take naps after it. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why am I'm sitting in a chair? Why am I getting tired? And I started then researching brain performance. And for me, it started actually with this guy who actually started the Bulletproof program, a guy named Dave Asprey. I was in Khost, Afghanistan in my CHU, like literally chatting with him over the internet. And he kind of turned me on to a lot of the MCTs and things like that from a dietary perspective. And then that is just that's a red pill, blue pill moment, right? Once you start actually researching that, it is impossible to not then get into the actual nootropic space. And when we say nootropics, for people listening and don't really know what a nootropic is, a nootropic is essentially just a drug that has an interaction with your brain. It can be a positive interaction or it could be a negative interaction, right? But the nootropic that people are most familiar with is in this cup. It's caffeine, right? It's coffee. So the caffeine, as well as a couple other things in coffee, but primarily the caffeine is a psychoactive drug. It's a nootropic. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about nootropics.
Yeah, it's a helpful definition, and I definitely want to dive into some specifics here. I think it's interesting because I grew up in the 90s. I grew up playing Pop Warner football in California, where we drank a lot of Gatorade. And then when I got to Indoc, I remember one of the first things Mr. Maroney, the instructor, said to us was, I think it was 1/3 Gatorade to 2/3 water, or maybe half and half. I can't remember what the specific thing was.
There it was one. Yeah, it was 1/3 to 2/3 water.
2/3. Yeah. Okay. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, okay, interesting. That was just a data point I hadn't really considered before. And also I wasn't in a position to argue with, right, going through a selection course like that. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Now I just do 1/3 Gatorade, 2/3 water. That's just how I do that from now on. But there was no education, in my childhood, and especially some of the propaganda, I guess, from Gatorade with the Florida football team and how it helped their performance. But then you look at all the sugar, you look at all these things. And so that was really my first step in trying to understand some of the things that I put into my body and how it can help and how it can also hurt, right? But I was also 18 years old. My metabolism was super high. And so I wasn't ever really experiencing any of the negative effects of all the white bread that I ate or the other starches that I ate or the bad fats that I ate or the sugar or whatever it was, right? It just fueled my body, and I was young and in shape and kind of doing things really well. Then cut to getting to the flight line, working, as a weapons troop and working with crew chiefs and avionics and all these other folks on the flight line. They're drinking multiple monsters a day, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, doing all these things to just stay awake and stay busy and kind of stay engaged and utilizing these things as tools to help their body and their brain. So they thought, and obviously those particular things are terrible. So I think for the military community, it's important for us to talk about what goes into our body, why it goes into our body, and what it is actually supposed to do. And we're kind of straddling these two worlds, right? Where there's the super high performance world of elite combat athletes that work for certain units in certain environments. But then you also have all of these other troops that are exposed to chemicals and machinery and all of these different things as they work in a support capacity, all under the umbrella of this conversation that we're having as a community about, like you said, mental health. And it's important that we have the mental health conversation. It's important that we think about what we think about, why we think about these things, but it is also very important that we integrate the physical and the mental with the emotional and even the spiritual, right? It's the kind of the whole person concept. So can you talk about what drove you to think about brain health in a physical capacity as opposed to, or integrated with, the mental capacity?
Sure. That's a pretty easy thing, I think, for people to understand. Mental health is your thoughts. It's the thing that the brain produces. Brain health is about the actual organ of the brain and what is making that work or not work. Are the roads free and clear, or are they full of clutter? Are essentially the stoplights working, or are they not working? It's really that simple. And I anybody who knows me knows I'm the biggest nerd on the planet. And once I get obsessed with understanding something, I read everything I can. But to keep everybody else from having to read, 30 plus neuroscience books, think about it this way. There are neurons, which everybody's familiar with, right, in your brain. It's the thing that really makes your brain work. And neurons pass signals from one side of the neuron to the other electronically. But then they convert that electronic signal into a chemical signal, which then transports that signal to another neuron, which then turns it into an electrical signal and transports it across that neuron. So when you look at the human body, the human brain, there's estimates there's about, I think it's 86 billion neurons in your brain. Each one of those basically have a bunch of sensors on them as a way to think about it, right? And they both transmit and receive signals on the ends, and that's the chemical processes that we're talking about. And there's trillions with a T of those in your brain. So 86 billion neurons trying to communicate between each other with trillions of what are called synapses, right? And they're trying to push chemicals across the synaptic cleft, which is the divide between them, right? So when we start talking about those types of numbers, what are the chances that something goes wrong? 100%. And so if you're dealing with depression, you cannot actively deal with that depression if your neurotransmitters are part of what is causing that depression. If you have a traumatic brain injury, you cannot heal that traumatic brain injury if your brain is not getting the right amount of oxygen and nutrients. So think about it through that lens, right? If you break your leg and you need a surgery, no matter how much physical therapy you do, you cannot fix that leg without the surgery. And then if you get the surgery, if you don't do the physical therapy, if you don't actually ingest the things that your body needs in order to make that muscle better, in order to make that bone better, then you won't ever actually be healed. And one of the very interesting things about the brain is the brain has what's called a blood-brain barrier. And so that is essentially a protective filter that keeps the trash that we eat from overly affecting our brain. The human body is absolutely fascinating. I mean, God designed it so that we can eat cardboard and our body will turn it into cells. Not very good cells, but it will turn it into new cells. Well, that cardboard doesn't make it into the brain. So a lot of the things that you do that are good for your body either aren't good for your brain or they don't make it into your brain to be able to help out. So the ability to have things, nutrients, right, that will cross the blood-brain barrier to allow the brain to heal, to allow the brain to actually work well at the chemical level. Those are the things that we need in order to actually have mental health, because you can't have mental health if your brain, the organ of your brain, is not healthy in the first place.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting error messages galore. So Nick summed it up beautifully, and I think you're both talking about something really important, which is when you're dealing with supplementation, what can you actually help with? What can you affect? What can you support? What's real and what's not? The supplements world is awash with grand claims, right? People promising you the world. I myself am a skeptic. Nick is a skeptic. And we approach these things from, I want to see the data. I want to see what's real. I want to understand the mechanisms that can be affected and the ones that can't be affected. And when you start to look at those questions with respect to the brain, you ask yourself things that Nick has asked himself and I've asked myself, which is, okay, what are the mechanisms that are identifiable and relevant and subject to supplementation? What can be supportive of supplementation? Nick talked about the blood-brain barrier. One funny thing, and I won't get into it and I won't badmouth anybody, is there are supplements out there that say, hey, look, we have this miracle compound. Just pop the pill and it's good to go. Well, if you do even a preliminary analysis of the clinical data, you find out that that super supplement doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So it never gets into your brain. It can't do what it's supposed to be doing, allegedly. So one of the guidelines that we've used for Go Pills is every nutrient that we have that we claim does work in the brain, it has to cross the triple B, the blood-brain barrier. It has to get through there. And in a second, we'll talk about some of the nutrients we actually have and which ones are fastest. Part of the analysis we've done, which is really cool, is we've seen who sprints across the blood-brain barrier fastest, who gets in there fastest. Leucine, by the way, is the winner, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But who gets in there to do the good work? One other topic I want to address. You talk about kind of the holistic approach to brain health, right? It is about that. It's about mind, spirit, body. It's about sleep. And anybody who claims that a pill is your one-stop miracle cure is lying to you. My personal belief, and Nick's as well, is you have to do, in my opinion, 3 things for brain health. They are sleep. Try to get sleep if you can. Number 2, my uncle's a neurologist. He's kind of a celebrated neurologist. And I always ask him, hey, pro tip, how do I make myself smarter? And he says, use your brain. Use it. Wherever you can, put the phone down and try to do the calculation in your head. Wherever you can, engage in debate or dialogue with somebody who is smarter than you are and disagrees with you. Hone your craft. Practice. Use the brain. The brain it's like physical fitness, right? If you aren't using it throughout the years, through the decades, it will deteriorate. It's that simple. It's like your body. But number 3 is, in my opinion, supplementation. So in addition to sleep and using your brain, it's unwise not to use the extraordinary tools that nature/God has put at our disposal, right? They are out there. And if you do a smart assessments of which ones work and put them in a pill, you really can benefit cognitive performance, brain function. And that's one of the things we should clarify here is when we talk about cognitive performance and cognitive enhancement, and Nic describes the processes involved in that, there are a lot of things about the brain that are a straight mystery. Let me give you an example. What is a thought? What is a memory? What is a memory? What does it actually consist of? Is it a chemical? Is it a string of atoms? Is it a brainwave? What is a memory? I can close my eyes and I can picture my son's face. How? What is that actual thing? A great deal of mystery is involved. So we don't want to tackle the mystery where people don't know what's going on. We tackle the sector of cognitive performance where people do know what's going on. And to allude back to what Nic was talking about, it is fundamentally, in our opinion, supplementation is about neurotransmitter support. It's neurotransmitter support. It's taking the fuels that you can put into a supplement that can get across the blood-brain barrier into your head and support, i.e. fuel neurotransmitter generation and modulate it. So it's 2 things. It's like augmenting the supply of neurotransmitters and also modulating it so that it's not too much and not too little. And that's the name of the game. And that's where Go Pills is, we believe, the best suite of neurotransmitter support supplements on the market, bar none. That's what it's about. And the name of the game in neurotransmitters, as Nic pointed out, I'll just leave with this, is this miraculous thing happens between the neurons, as Nic was describing, electrical impulses, all of which together do constitute amazing things like thought and decision-making processes and memory and cognition and executive function. All of those electrical impulses are flowing through the brain. You do, as Nic pointed out, want them to be optimized. Well, guess what? They can degrade if the jump from neuron to neuron via neurotransmitter is damaged by the absence of sufficient neurotransmitter, right? Or the right amount of neurotransmitter. So when you help the brain create the neurotransmitters, you're basically allowing all of its signaling to proceed apace, to move the way it wants to move without interruption and without degradation. And that's something that I got really excited about because I was like, wait, the brain might be a mystery, but you can boost the ability of the brain to have the neurotransmitters it needs to do the signaling that's required for all of its extraordinary functions.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in there. I think the TLDR for the community from that particular section seems to me to be your brain cannot perform its
mental functions if its physical functions are not taken care of. And
correct.
the for those in the audience and for those in our community who do struggle with their brain's performance from a anxiety standpoint, from a depression standpoint, from a lot of these things that are endemic in our community from what we've been doing over the course of the last 20 plus years, it is really important to remember that a good portion of that struggle is physical. The things that you are putting into your body and the things that you're putting into your brain are directly affecting those outcomes. Again, not to dismiss or to minimize the mental health side of this and therapy and all of those things that do and can help. But a good portion of this is physical. And that is something that our culture at large, our society at large does not talk enough about. And using the word supplement, I think is important. It's what it is, but what a supplement is, a supplement supplements the other things that you're doing. It complements the other things that you're doing in your body. So I made the joke about opening up this podcast by being hydrated and having had my protein and my good healthy fats and then taking my Go pills. But that is my mindset. My mindset is if I take these pills after having eaten leftover cold pizza for breakfast, a cheeseburger and French fries and a milkshake for lunch, it ain't going to work. It needs to be a part of a program, a part of a system, a part of a way of living that is actually going to move you forward mentally and physically.
It's absolutely true. And one of the things I should add is we talk about the term neurotransmitters. It's not an alien term. It's actually something we're all very familiar with. Some of the key neurotransmitters are the famous dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, glutamate. We all are familiar with the terms dopamine and serotonin with respect to depression and anxiety disorders and mental health, right? Social media use, because there's a direct chemical correlation between the state of your brain and its ability to do what it wants. One of the things we believe, I think Nic shares this belief, is it's about allowing the brain to do the extraordinary things it wants to do and can do. So don't give it the cheeseburger. The cheeseburger, to your point, is not supplying it with what it needs. Give it things that can allow it to do the extraordinary work. In some cases, the rehab work it wants to do, the healing work it wants to do, the neuroplasticity dimension, which is the brain's ability to heal itself. It wants to do extraordinary things, but sometimes it's short on fuel. Our big dramatic question for this entire venture was, why not give it the best fuel? Why not design what we believe is the best fuel and then provide it in pill form to, yes, operators and members of the military, but also civilians. If it's going to work for operators at a very high level, it will also appeal to the civilian population. Correct? That's the mantra.
Right. And yeah, and it needs to perform in concert with other positive interactions that you're giving your body and your brain. Before jumping into the ingredients and why this particular cocktail is probably a bad word to use, but the combination of ingredients works. I'm sure something that people are thinking about as they listen is my pre-workout, my Alpha Brain, my sort of these other multivitamins and these other nootropics that have been advertised and that I've been taking and that have been, helping. Can you talk a little bit about some of those and what makes this different?
Sure. I think
absolutely. Nic, why don't you jump in on the pre-workout? Nic is a good
I think one of the ways for people to think about this is what stimulates an action in the brain. That's a separate thing versus what actually feeds the brain. And that's two different ways to think about this. So a great example is, leucine and tyrosine, the combination of feed the brain. Caffeine stimulates an action from the brain. So Alpha Brain's a great example. Lots of people use Alpha Brain. Great product. Nothing against Alpha Brain. In fact, if you are an Alpha Brain user, go ahead and stack Go pills on top of your Alpha Brain and kind of get to see what the next level is. The reality is a lot of people have just stopped using the Alpha Brain and they just go to using the Go pills, myself being one of them. I have really, when I got into this space, I started creating my own cocktails. It's one of the things that Christian and I connected over. We actually met on something completely different, like child protection associated, right? A technology platform. And then we just started riffing on brain health, and I started talking about my nootropic use, which at the time was a handful of about 30 pills that I would take. And Christian was like, oh, it's funny you should say that, because I've got these other things that I'm working on. And now instead of the 30 pills, I just take 4, because I supplement my Go pills with a little extra tyrosine because I need it. Right. And, but that's the difference between kind of what you're doing on your own versus somebody just kind of creating the stack for you. So that's what happens with pre-workout. Pre-workout is really just somebody created a stack for you, but it's very specific. It's specific for helping you actually get in the gym and perform your best. And it's more about helping your muscles than it is about helping your brain. Now, some pre-workouts will have something like huperzine in it, which is great. Huperzine's a great drug. However, huperzine is one of those things that if you use it every single day, you will develop a very significant tolerance to it, and it will just no longer work anymore. And then it'll actually start blowing out your adenosine receptors and your dopamine receptors. And so that's an example of something that if you were taking it in a schedule that made sense for your brain, it could be helpful. But because you take it every single day and then you take it in these massive amounts. So I've got a friend who has a supplement company, and he sent me his pre-workout, and I felt like my soul was going to crawl out of my body with this stuff, right? Because we, especially in the veteran community, tend to think that, well, if a little's good, more is better. And so we, you know, when you look at caffeine, most vets are probably in the 1,000 milligrams a day of caffeine. Caffeine toxicity starts at about 450 milligrams for an average 200-pound man. So they're in caffeine toxicity usually by 10 o'clock a.m. And then they wonder why they're taking so much caffeine and they're just so tired come 2 p.m., 3 p.m. Well, because they force their brain to go into hyperdrive, not hypercognition, but hyperdrive, and they burnt out all their neurotransmitters. So if they were taking their pre-workout, and if they're taking it first thing in the morning, your brain, basically your adenosine receptors can't even really clear up to be able to accept a caffeine molecule until you've actually been awake for about 60 to 90 minutes. So now you've got all this caffeine in your body that isn't actually doing anything, and then it flows around and it just nails you all at once. Oh, and you took it first thing in the morning, you're probably fasting, so you took it on an empty stomach, which means it hits you hard and you feel great in the gym. And your body doesn't really take a toll on that in the rest of the day, but your brain does. Now you can't focus at work, and now you yell at your kids, and now you're short with your wife, and now you do all these other things that, because your brain isn't working well, that actually are detrimental to the rest of your life. Yeah, your body's in good shape, but what about the rest of it? And so that's where having, you know, the proper amount of neurotransmitter support is actually very useful, because not only does it say help you in the gym with focus and things like that, but it also then allows you to be a normal human and not be a robot throughout the day. We in the veteran community, I think when we're downrange, we kind of pride ourselves on being robots, unemotional, just execute, sleep when we can, and continue to execute. And there's a time and a place for that. But anybody knows that if you're a father to young children, if you're, you know, a husband to a wife, you know, or you're in a significant relationship of any kind, or you lead people in a civilian environment, you can't be that robot. Because if you do, yeah, again, you might be in good shape, but you're doing things to your brain to cause you to damage all of your relationships. So you take like a mom who yells at her kid, and she didn't really mean to, but she was very frustrated. What are the chances that she actually just needs a little extra L-theanine or a little extra tyrosine in her brain to bring her down to where she is? Or You take the vet who's taking Xanax or something along those lines, which, yes, it affects their anxiety, but it also has some really bad post-cognitive effects where it actually makes the brain not work. That's kind of the whole point, where you could take something like Bacopa minori and you can get even better anti-anxiety effects than you get from Xanax, and you can get a cognitive enhancement as opposed to a cognitive degradation. And so I think that's the difference between like the pre-workout, which is something that is going to assist me with my physical health, but will ultimately damage my mental health, or damage my brain health, and therefore damage my mental health. Or I can take something that is good for my brain that's going to help with my brain health, which also will then have the physical performance upside.
Yeah, I stopped taking pre-workout every day close to like 9 months ago now at this point, like 6 to 9 months ago. I saw a significant increase in certain performance physically in the gym. It's in my driveway, in my backyard. I don't go to a gym. I put all my stuff, in a shed. But same thing. I've started now just taking it on heavy days, or if there's a specific kind of workout that I need to get into, or a stamina on the row machine or something like that, that's when I take it. I don't take it every single day. And what it unlocked for me was this thought, like, again, I grew up in the 90s, right? So I grew up with the creatine, like the kind of early onset of creatine, whey protein, weight gainer, all of that, right? You're like playing Pop Warner football, you're getting ready to try to make it varsity as a sophomore. And so you're thinking about all these different things. You're probably putting chemicals in your body and executing physical activities with weights and things like that you probably shouldn't in that developmental phase, kind of that early in life. And I think one of the good things that we've experienced now as a culture is more and better options that are organic and natural and clean. But I think one of the detriments is that we have so much choice fatigue that we just get into a system and we get locked into, all right, I start my day with my coffee, then I take my collagen protein, and then I wait 2 hours and I take my pre-workout, and then I have my bone broth right after my workout. And then I have my, chicken and broccoli at 4:00 and then dinner at 6:30. And we're just like, you kind of think you're eating clean. You think you're performing well. You think you're putting these good things in your body, and you might be, but at scale, you're just very robotically moving through essentially a set of products that have been marketed to you to make you think that if you just do these on this routine and this system, you'll be fine. What I hear you all talking about is, hey, let's step back for a second. Let's look at what we're putting into our body, when we're putting it into our body, why we're putting it into our body, and looking at the best way to engage a protocol that works for me and my particular physical and mental capabilities and desires.
And there's another dimension to all of that. You're absolutely right. But there's also, in addition to this abundance of choice, there's also a dosing question. And Nic was alluding to this, which is pre-workouts are appealing for a number of reasons. One of them is that you feel a rush because you are more often than not having too much caffeine. And so there is a high, but as you know, most folks I know who use pre-workouts say, gosh, it gets me to the gym, like Nic said, and in large part because you're overstimulated. And I feel amped up there. It doesn't necessarily that you're physically amped up or your muscles are more powerful or providing more output. It's that you're psychologically amped up, but there's a crash afterwards, right? A lot of folks who are pre-workout addicted say, gosh, I get so amped and revved up, but then I kind of come down, and then I didn't need to do A, B, C, D, E to keep myself normalized and leveled out after that amazing rush. So one of the things we aren't interested in is that kind of artificial high. It's about a genuine cognitive enhancement based on the fuels you're putting into your brain. So not anti-pre-workout, but just one of the seductions of pre-workouts is that insane rush, right? I mean, look at the ingredients of some of them. It's incredible what they pack into that stuff. I don't touch them personally. Now, anecdotally, a lot of folks are telling us that they have replaced their pre-workout with Go Pills, and boy, your Go Pills pre-workout is so awesome. And we smile because we're like, it wasn't designed as a pre-workout, but we're glad that you feel it's a dynamite pre-workout. The other thing I wanted to address is Onnit, and Nic very skillfully doffed his cap to Onnit, as we should. They're an awesome brand. And we look at them as kind of the pioneers in this space, right? And that deserves respect. but we're also conscious of the business ecosystem in which we exist. And one of the things we care a great deal about is value. So no disrespect to them, but you find the best price for Onnit Alpha Brain online. And it doesn't even have some of the key cognitive boosters that we believe are essential, but that baseline product of theirs is $30 typically for 15 servings when you read the fine print. Again, this is the read the fine print dimension. $30 for 15 servings. We're $40 for 30 servings, twice the servings for $10 more. So we're proud of the fact that we win on value. I also believe that we win on our stack, and we win on actual volume of nutrient per capsule, per serving. But winning on value is important to us too. And we go toe to toe with any nootropic in the business and win on value, hands down.
I would also like to go on the record speaking positively about Onnit. I am both a Go Pills and an Onnit customer. I've been an Onnit customer for almost a decade now at this point. I love what Joe and Aubrey built over there, and the way they approach it. As you said, they're definitely pioneers, in this field. So as we talk about, I'd love to talk specifically about the ingredients and the stack that you have and how it works. One note before we do though is as I've become a customer of these types of brands, like Heart and Soil, I use as well, and thinking about what I'm putting into my body, why I'm putting it into my body, both short-term performance, mid-term performance, and longevity, right? Not in the sense of like, transhumanism and I want to live forever and, be able to, whatever, but longevity from the sense of as long as I am going to live, I want to live as well as I possibly can. Sleep is something you brought up early, Christian, and our friends over at Bravo Actual and Hunter 7 have developed Rack Out, which is a great clean supplement that helps alleviate some, or helps with sleep and with a stack in a way that is something that we can think about long term. In my family, my grandparents and parents have struggled with sleep for a long time. I do not personally have any addictions to pills or alcohol or anything like that. But I looked at the stack that they have and I thought to myself, oh, this is a sleep supplement that I can take now in my, at the time, early 30s and continue to use and let it work over time in my brain and in my body as I sleep. And I've seen some significant increase in both quantity and quality of my sleep. So that's just anecdotally to kind of talk about all these different pieces that we can think about as we're putting together, and we're customers of these different companies. But let's talk about Go Pills, what's in Go Pills, why that combination, why the amounts, and let's kind of get into some of that ingredient science.
Yeah, I can jump in on that if you want, Nick.
Do it.
And by the way, one of the things that Nick brings to the table that's so awesome is, one, his extraordinarily high IQ, and that's not idle praise, by the way, but also he is this kind of living experiment. Let me just back up for a second. So Go Pills, that name, you're familiar with it. People in the military are familiar with it. One of the things that happened during the course of my work with the military is making documentaries, and I've written books with guys who are tier 1. And you come to understand that there is the phenomenon of Go Pills in the military, right? So people go out and operate, and they're given things to boost them and make them function at a high level and go out and take care of business. And sometimes they come back at night and they take no Go Pills. Now, I have friends who were doing 90-day rotations, Go Pills, no Go Pills, Go Pills, no Go Pills. And so I said, I need to find out what those things are. And in some cases, they were really strong compounds in the Go Pills. More often than not, they're things like modafinil, a prescription medication in Go Pills. And so one of the things we wanted to do was create a safe, clean, non-prescription option, right? Prescription medications are prescription for a reason. We wanted a non-prescription, safe, clean option, by the way, that is totally DOD clear. As Nick puts it, you won't piss hot, because none of them are on the prohibited list, the DOD Supplement Committee's prohibited list. Safe, clean, efficacious, non-prescription. That was the idea. So how do we analyze the nootropics? There are so many different nootropics out there. Funny sidebar factoid, nootropics, the word was coined in the 70s by, I believe, a Romanian psychologist. It's nuos and tropine. It means brain and steer. So steering the brain, psychoactive elements that can help with cognition, help power the brain. That's the root of the term. I know all the nootropics. I read the clinical data. Like Nick, I like to stay up late and read the NIH's PubMed, which is the compilation of, I think, 35 million citations All the clinical journals are on there and you read them. Some clinical journals are superior to others. They're not all created equal, and one learns which ones are reputable. And reading all the data, we conduct what we call affectionately the cage match. You take all those nootropics, you throw them in a cage, let them fight it out, some die, and whoever's left standing at the end, based on safety and efficacy and quality, those are the ones that we put in. So let's start right off the bat with a cool one that probably has a surprise dimension. So creatine monohydrate, right? We have creatine monohydrate in there. And you might know this, but a lot of folks say, hey, creatine, I take creatine for my workout, right? It's for muscles. Well, the reality, the aha dimension to creatine is that also has a profound beneficial impact on cognitive performance. And there's one journal that I'll just tell you how we think about these things because it's interesting how we do our analysis. I won't get into the weeds on all of them, but there was a study, I believe, in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Biological Sciences, right? UK, very reputable. It was a clinical peer-reviewed trial, placebo double-blind, of creatine monohydrate and its effect on working memory and intelligence. And so one of the first things you ask yourself is, okay, so how the heck do they measure intelligence and how do they measure working memory in a clinical trial? Well, there are a lot of cool tools, but there are a handful that I love and kind of trust. And here are the ones that I'm just going to cite with respect to creatine. This trial does attention and working memory based on something called reverse digit span. And it's a really cool mechanism. I'll just briefly describe it, which is I read to you or I give you 6 numbers, 12, 13, 5, 6, 9, 7, right? And then if you can recite that back to me, that shows that you were paying attention and your working memory is functional, right? I then make it a bit more complicated. I reverse that. So I say 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, 9. Now, repeat that to me in order and then reverse it. And your capacity to reverse that span back to me, having only heard it once, and the speed at which you do it is a great measure of working memory and attention, right? This is one of the things that people look at when they're analyzing ADHD and so forth. And creatine monohydrate measurably and significantly boosted working memory based on reverse digit span in this clinical trial. Intelligence, how do you measure that? Raven's progressive matrices. These are 2 of the tests. I'll only cite these 2. And the Raven's progressive matrix is what you've seen in IQ tests, where it's those funny like combinations of items that are changing. So it's a square, and then there's a chunk out of the square in the top right, and so another chunk out, another chunk out, another chunk out. And you're supposed to be internalizing the progression in those images, and then they map it onto another field, another set. And that new set is missing a spot, and you got to fill it in. And that's a great measure of intelligence. Whether you can read the pattern in the first set and apply it to the second set. Again, creatine monohydrate in this clinical trial measurably and significantly improved performance in the subjects with respect to Raven's progressive matrix. Now that matters to me because those are real measurable results. And so creatine monohydrate, for that reason and others, kicked butt in the cage mash. It was crushing other supplements, right? And we went through and basically picked the 8 that won the cage match and the 8 that we could fit into 2 capsules at an amount that actually had an effect. You know, caffeine's great. If you put 1 milligram of caffeine and say, our product has caffeine, it does nothing for you. So creatine monohydrate, alpha GPC, which we'll get into, bacopa monnieri, theanine, tyrosine, leucine, caffeine. Many of them are amino acids. Alpha GPC is a great one. And by the way, Nick, if you want to jump in on any of these, you may, but I can talk about a couple more if you want. Alpha GPC is alpha glycerophosphorylcholine. And what alpha GPC does, and this ties in nicely to what we were talking about before, is you ingest it, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, passes the first test, right? It actually gets into the brain where it can do whatever work it's meant to do. And one of the things it does there is act as a neurotransmitter precursor for the vitally important neurotransmitter, acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is an excitatory neurotransmitter, which is vitally important to your brain's ability to fast process, signal, learn, and think. When you're thinking, if you ask me what's 5 times 5, and I'm thinking about the answer to that, what's happening is a lot of these extraordinary signals are moving through my brain, right? That Nick talked about, and they're going from neuron across the synapse, via neurotransmitter to other neurons. Acetylcholine is a vitally important one of those, and alpha GPC is one of the most effective precursors for acetylcholine. Dopamine, the famous dopamine, right, which is part of your reward pathway, the neurotransmitter of the brain. You need sufficient dopamine levels. Low levels are associated with cognitive malady and disease, and I'm not going to talk about disease, but low levels of dopamine are associated with ADHD, right? And dopamine is supported directly by tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid, crosses the blood-brain barrier, boosts dopamine levels. And it's always, to a certain extent, about boosting the levels. I'll give you one example where it isn't just about boosting the levels. Leucine, badass branch-chain amino acid, an essential amino acid. In other words, your body does not make it. You have to ingest it. You've heard of leucine before. Has a profound role in cognition, in thinking, processing, and memory, because one of the things it does is it's the fastest amino acid across the blood-brain barrier, the fastest. You ingest it, it just gets up there really fast. Again, a very promising sign in our cage match. We're like, yeah, leucine, badass. You got up there really fast. Leucine gets up there, and it does its work as a precursor for the vitally important neurotransmitter glutamate, right? Super important. Now, the interesting thing about glutamate is that, yeah, you want to boost its levels. If you have too much, you can suffer neurotoxicity. It can be a major problem. You do not want too much.
Did you lose him, Nick?
Yeah, I lost him.
Part of the new.
Oh, there we go.
You lost me?
Sorry, we lost you there for a second. You said too much, and then we lost you.
Yeah.
So at any rate, again, dopamine is supported by a couple of the nutrients in our stack. Acetylcholine is supported by our stack, and glutamate is directly supported by our stack. And let me just say one word about caffeine. People say, yeah, man, I need 900 milligrams of caffeine, 900 mgs to make it through my day. No, you do not. We have 150 milligrams of caffeine, which is actually, everyone has their own preference, and we're all entitled to our own preference. But the reason we chose 150 was 150 is the number where you really get, on a single dose, the cognitive benefits of caffeine. And the mechanism of action, the MOA, as Nick calls it, on caffeine is really, really cool, because we all think we know what it does. But one of the main things it does is, as you live your life throughout the day, and as the hours progress, what's happening in your brain is adenosine is building up, right? Adenosine is building up. And that adenosine is an indicator to your brain that you are tired. It's one of the ways we realize we are fatigued. Caffeine is a wily little critter. And what it does is it zooms through the brain, and it affixes itself to the adenosine receptors on a neuron and blocks it. So the adenosine cannot be received and cannot send its signal of you are tired. So to a certain extent, caffeine is, and God bless it, I love caffeine, it's kind of tricking us, right? It's like your body's saying you are fatigued. So why do I mention that? In all of this, it's great to have a supplement that keeps you alert. If you're doing shift work, if you're working late, if you're a dad, if you're a mom, there are moments where you need cognitive supplementation. Wherever you can, catch up on sleep. Your brain generates adenosine for a reason. It is telling you sleep. So I don't sleep much, but once a week I try to get, my 8 hours just to catch up, because it's good to outfox your brain's adenosine signals, but it's not healthy extraordinarily long term. And when you're doing, I hate to say it, when you're doing the pre-workout dosages of caffeine, you are really, in my opinion, it's a personal opinion, you are really messing with an important set of signals that your brain is trying to send you. And Nick alluded to that. And that can have deleterious impacts on other dimensions of your life, including psychological. And one other thing I'll say, sorry, because there's so much here, I could go on for about 10 hours, as could Nick, but one other piece of the science that's fascinating, in addition to neurotransmitter support, your brain burns fuel, famously. Mm-hmm. Your brain needs glucose, you need sugar. So people who crack me up who say, I never touch sugar, I never eat glucose of any kind. Well, your brain needs a bunch of it. So do yourself a favor, make sure you get some glucose. But on top of that, one of the main energy currencies in your brain is the famous ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. ATP is what your body creates to burn it, to process energy. Your brain needs it too. And that's what creatine monohydrate supports and augments, is your brain's ATP supply. So with all these nutrients that we have, they are literally supporting the fuel your brain needs to do the signaling required to think, to make decisions, to assess a number of options and say, boy, that's a bewildering number of options. I identify that, and that as my priorities. Prioritization is a function of cognitive performance, right? And it's a vitally important one. It's easy to be overwhelmed in this day and age. So threat assessment, but option assessment is vitally important. And then deciding I prioritize that one. That is a prefrontal cortex function supported by neurotransmitters. Why would you not give your brain the fuel it needs to do that the best it can?
Yeah. So a question that keeps coming up as I'm listening to you is, and you mentioned shift work, right? We're talking about the military, but we're also talking about entrepreneurs and civilians, high performers, just in whatever industry or market they're operating in. And then we're also talking about caffeine, and we're also talking about with coffee. We're also talking about pre-workout. We're talking about this. Some people have used this as a replacement for pre-workout. Do you have a belief, an opinion on when people should be taking Go Pills? And when I say when, I mean what part of the day, and then how much coffee they should or shouldn't be drinking as a part of their daily routine and daily consumption. We've already talked about the pre-workout aspect of it, obviously, but is this something that people should be taking, in the afternoon after the caffeine from their couple of cups of coffee or several cups of coffee is worn off? What do you think and believe about that?
I'll say one quick thing, and then I want Nic to elaborate. The one quick thing I'll say is, I would like to be able to tell you that this should and can replace coffee completely. I love coffee way too much to ever say that. So yes, in theory it could, but no, I have coffee and I have one Go Pill at about 7, and then I have another Go Pill at 9, and I take 2 a day. But I will never forsake my first love, coffee. I'm just saying that, even though we own a technical competitor to it. It's actually much different though, because we have caffeine and then these 7 other things that coffee doesn't have, which I want. So they can coexist in perfect harmony. But Nic, why don't you jump in on that?
I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So the answer is it depends, like everything in life. I try not to take caffeine before I've been awake for at least an hour, and then I take my caffeine. And when you get neurotransmitter support and caffeine together, great. So I actually start my morning with salt water, pick a freaking electrolyte, right? I use Element because I think the watermelon stuff is like the nectar of the gods, but that's what I use. And I drink 30 ounces of water in the morning with an Element in it. And then I get into my coffee, and I usually wash my Go Pills down with coffee. But it's important to understand half-life of these drugs. So you take like caffeine's a great example. The half-life is relatively quick. But the pre-workouts that have, say, huperzine in it, or one of the things that on it has in Alpha Brain is huperzine, the half-life on huperzine can be like 10 to 14 hours. So you can very quickly approach a neurotoxicity level of huperzine if you take it, if you take that every single day, unless you're taking small doses. And so otherwise you're going to develop resistance to it. You're going to end up with some toxicity issues. And that's where you get into this whole kind of veteran mentality of, well, if a little's good, then a lot is better. So what I do is, depending on what's going on, I tend to take 2 Go Pills along with all my other supplements after I've been up for about an hour. So, roughly 6:30 in the morning, I'll take all of those. I've already had my 32 ounces of water as I'm like unloading the dishwasher and getting kids up and all that kind of stuff, right? And then depending on what's going on, I'll take 1 or 2 more Go Pills around noon. Now, I also have given myself shall we say, a quite high tolerance for caffeine, thanks to my service. And so I tend to then not do not do coffee in the afternoon. I will just go ahead and I'll just do the Go pills. But the neurotransmitter support is really important because what you don't want to do is just stack Go pills with an energy drink, because now all you're doing is putting things into hyperdrive. And think about it like when anything is spinning too fast, right? If a helicopter rotor spins too fast, the helicopter falls out of the sky. If a jet engine turbine spins too fast, it stops working, right? It stops producing thrust. So there is actually a balance in neurotransmitter support in your brain and the levels of caffeine that you have. And also you don't want whatever it is that you take to have such a long half-life that it then starts interfering with your sleep, which then will cause this whole cycle where you feel like you just need more caffeine. You feel like you just need more stimulants, when the reality is you just actually need more sleep. So everything that is in Go pills is designed to be taken on a daily basis. That's why, again, there is not huperzine in it. If you want some huperzine, great, but you really should cycle huperzine every other day, or maybe just twice a week, depending on your tolerance for it. A lot of people will start taking these types of supplements in the beginning, and then they kind of can't live without them, but they're not really seeing the same effect that they did when they first started taking it. Everything in Go pills, for the most part, will be out of your system relatively shortly, so you can use it on a daily basis. However, some of the ingredients, specifically like the Bacopa, will actually, and the creatine to an extent, will actually have long-term protective effects. And that, I think, is what is so important for people in the military. And it doesn't matter if you're an operator or if you're on a flight line, you are being exposed to things, to pressures, really, that damage your brain, and chemicals and all types of things. And so you need the neurotransmitter support, but you also need the effects of some of these other ingredients that will actually help your brain to heal over time, so that the actual physical structure of your brain can perform better.
By the way, I want to add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead and add. I'm not going to forget. You go ahead and add what you're going to add.
Now, Nick's point is a profound one, which is, in addition to that instant cognitive function that you want, that quick hit of intelligence boost, memory boost, whatever you want to call it, there is this long-term neuroprotective dimension to it, which also adds to your brain's ability to function. And Bacopa, you mentioned Bacopa. Bacopa has been shown clinically. Again, this is all available on gopills.com. We're super transparent. All the science is there. It's all linked to the NIH and PubMed. So every journal is accessible. And it's actually pretty cool reading. But Bacopa does a number of things. It has indirectly almost a neurotransmitter support dimension. But Nick alluded to this. It also regenerates neuronal endings. It increases cerebral blood flow, which heals the neuron, which supports the neuron, which basically, I'm not going to say heals the synapse, because the synapse is a complex system, but there's this degree to which your brain is an organ, right? And it's got blood vessels, it's got tissue, and Bacopa has a neuroprotective dimension, which keeps all of its insane machinery vibrant and healthy. And that long-term is a beneficial thing that you want to seek out in your supplements. And not all of them have it, but a handful of the Go Pill stack do have those dimensions by design.
Yeah, I'm glad you both brought this up. And we need to figure out how to go on offense instead of just staying on defense. And I'll use the military community as an avatar for this. I think it applies to culture at large, though, as well. Acutely in the military, we have exposures, toxic exposures, and we work, day shift, swing shift, mid shift. Our sleep is thrown off. All of these different things that we experience that folks don't experience in the civilian world. And so it's a good acute example. We need to be on offense to protect our bodies and our brains, instead of just being like, oh shit, all of these things have happened to me over the course of 4 to 25 years, however long you spent serving. Now I have to play catch up to try to figure out how to counteract all those things that I experienced. Well, now we have decades worth of data that tells us if we put certain things in our body in certain ways at certain times and execute protocols that are healthy and progressive for our brains and our bodies moving forward, we have a lot more control over our own health and our own long-term health and longevity. and brain health over time than we ever thought we did.
Yes, that right there. It is so much easier to protect than it is to rebuild.
Yeah.
Right? If I, it's very easy for me to tear down your house. So you probably want to protect me from tearing down your house because it'll take you a long time to rebuild it. And the damage can be done, especially in the military, in an instant. So I've got traumatic brain injury from lots of different things. Won't bore people with again, kind of all the war stories, but most people do. And I think with Dr. What's his name? Chris Fruth, I think, who did the operator syndrome book. And is really kind of pioneering the research around that. What he makes a generalized argument that anybody who completes a complete special operations training cycle, right, is awarded the MOS. That person, AFSC, whatever branch you're in, that person probably has the beginning precursors to operator syndrome. And I would actually say that anybody who deals with gunfire in close proximity, deals with aircraft on a flight line, deals with explosives, or deals with, shall we say, high impact activities, which are usually associated primarily with, kind of special ops infantry, is going to have some level of traumatic brain injury. The question is how much. And so if we can prevent that, so with my traumatic brain injury, kind of things started to get a little bit worse. I went and saw Dr. Amen at the Amen clinics, and they're looking through all of my brain scans. They're like, based on your history, like you're not doing great actually. And they helped me fix some things and fix actually some things with my nootropic stack. But they said, you should be a lot worse. I wonder why you're not. And so by showing them what I was doing in the past, basically what they concluded was that, I took aniracetam. I took a double dose of aniracetam every single morning. That's a nootropic that goes all the way back to the 30s. I took a double dose of that every single morning for almost a decade. And the neurologists at the Amen clinic were like, oh, well, that's why your brain wasn't damaged more. They say it probably was damaged more. It's been healing because you were taking this drug that is very clearly a drug that increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. So you were actually giving it what it needed to heal, and as well as kind of some other things. But aniracetam is very much a chemical, like made in a lab, not great for your kidneys. Has some side effects versus. You can get exactly the same effects as you can with the aniracetam just by taking something like Go pills. With me, it was aniracetam and, wash it down with coffee or an energy drink. And so that's kind of the way to think about this is if we can buttress the brain, we can protect it, we can fortify it when it does take that punch, because that's going to happen. And there's nothing we can do to prevent the punch, right? Just the overpressure coming out of an M4 in a room, right, in a CQB environment, just one shot causes a micro tear in the brain. Not to mention the ranger who's 2 feet behind you who cooks off a belt-fed saw out a window, right? So that those types of pressures are going to cause problems to the brain. We can't alleviate that because of just the very kinetic nature of what war is. But what we can do is make the brain so protected and so healthy that when it takes that punch, it can absorb it better. It does less damage because the brain is healthier, and then it can heal itself faster based on what it is that we're providing it with.
Yes. You talking about one environment, I'll speak more to the other environment, on the flight line, you're standing next to, under, and around running jet engines all the time, or, rotary wing aircraft if you're working on that, right? Like, you're standing next to bombs, wiring fuses. There's, all of the different fluids that avionics uses on all of those systems, hydraulic fluid, all these different fluids that are on your hands that are then seeped in. You wash your hands, but then you're still going like this. You're still rubbing your nose. You're still kind of doing all these things, your ears, all this stuff is seeping in. So yes, there's the TBI and there's the sort of those more like acute effects that are happening to your brain. And then there's also more of those mid and long-term effects from the chemicals that we're around. Obviously the M4 and all these others have that as well with the chemicals coming off of those particular tools. But then the other ones that you're using as a support troop, kind of regardless, flight line, other places, all these things that are on your body gets into your skin, gets onto your face, gets into your eyes and your ears and your nose and all these different things. Like we don't realize watching myself on this. I'm itching, I'm touching, I'm doing this. It's just, it is something that we do as humans. Some more and some less, but there's those kind of acute injuries, and then there's those long-term exposures.
Yeah, and not only will things, so when you talk about toxins in your brain, right? So there's a couple of different things you want to think about in toxins in the body writ large, which is what are you taking to absorb those toxins so that you can pass them out, but then also what are you taking to actually increase the blood flow? So the increase of blood flow is so important that we really overlook that. The thing that is actually best for your brain is sleep and cleaning. And so the cleaning tends to happen when you sleep, but it also is one of the reasons why physical, like actually working out and staying in shape is so important for your brain, is because you need to also then use the increase in blood flow to deliver oxygen and deliver the nutrients. But those are very short periods of time of an overall window. So what can you do to enhance that? Now, if you manage to detonate one of those bombs that you're arming next to the aircraft, Go Pills can't help you with that. But for our brothers and sisters in the Marine Corps, with all the crayons that they're eating, this will actually help to, increase the blood flow and make them so that they don't want to eat the crayons.
But along those lines, now, wait a minute. First of all, let me just say, Nick, your claim that Go Pills won't help you if a bomb goes off, that hasn't been shown clinically.
That's true. We have no studies.
May actually, we don't know that's true yet. Just kidding. But you're talking about toxins and exposure to toxins and exposure to complex environments, which can have a deleterious impact on the brain. Your brain and your body generates its own toxins, and you're talking about kind of external toxins that you're adding to the system. So your brain is always dealing with toxins. Your body's always dealing with toxins. And of course, one of the main toxins is the oxidation, right? That's occurring in your body. So oxidation to a certain extent is bad, and it's combated by antioxidants, the famous antioxidants. So antioxidant activity is also really important in the brain. And one of my favorite clinics of them all, is the Mayo Clinic, the world famous Mayo Clinic. I'm originally from Minnesota, so I'm super partial to the Rochester, Minnesota-based Mayo Clinic. And it's often rated the #1 clinic in the world, right? And so they're very skeptical, and they don't typically weigh in on supplements and say yay or nay, because I like to sort of wait. But they have weighed in on a few, and I take that seriously. But there's one trial they did in 2012. They have a laboratory clinical arm that does trials. And they did an analysis of ginseng. We have ginseng and Go Pills. And this was part of the cage match, which allowed ginseng to win. They did a trial on cancer patients, both those who have basically survived and are recovering, and those who were undergoing cancer treatment. And apparently, I think the number, as I recall, is 90% of people who are cancer patients or cancer survivors but recovering, 90% suffer from some version of chronic fatigue. Fatigue's a huge problem, right? Because I think more often than not, your body's stress response, its cortisol response, is just overactivated and can't turn off, as I understand it. And they did this trial with ginseng, and they found that ginseng had a profound impact on the reduction of fatigue in cancer patients. And I thought that was fascinating, and I wanted to know why. Why does it do that? Well, ginseng has ginsenosides, right? The active compound in ginseng is ginsenosides. They're polyphenols, they're this miraculous plant-based compounds that are like antioxidants. And they fight oxidative stress. They go in your body and they fight oxidative stress. And what they found is that that kind of a function also is relevant in the brain, right? Your brain wants the same protective activity that your body does. And toxins are warring on your brain at all time. And one of the ways to help it is by giving it plant compounds that can reduce oxidative stress. One of the reasons we have ginseng. The other kind of toxicity that your brain can succumb to, and this goes back to your point about prevention as opposed to rapidly playing catch up after it's too late, right? The prevention piece, and when one talks about the brain, I particularly am very prone to like a lot of different kinds of metaphors because it's so fascinating and you want to try to understand it. But one of the simple ones for me, you mentioned engines, is like, okay, motor oil in an engine. Like if you don't have motor oil in an engine, you let it get low and eventually it'll seize up and it'll certainly get damaged, right? To a certain extent, you want your brain to have its version of motor oil, right? And for lack of a better term, let's just call neurotransmitters a type of motor oil. When you have low dopamine, there is a correlation with ADHD. When you have imbalanced dopamine, there is a correlation with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Why? Because there's degradation of the system that's cumulative. And so I'm not saying that I have a cure, we have a cure. I'm not talking about a cure, but I am talking about equipping your brain with the things that allow you to have sufficient amounts of the stuff that when you're low on it, you can suffer major mental disorder. So I'm not talking about a cure. I'm saying give your brain the stuff that's basically the motor oil. Before the engine seizes up, everybody knows that if you run out of motor oil and your pistons seize up inside the chamber, you cannot fix that engine, right? It's done. So the motor oil metaphor has been helpful for me to understand, okay, what is it we're really trying to do?
And that's important because the side effects of or should we say not the side effects, but the presentation of the seized up engine is pretty much the same regardless of what it is that you're dealing with. So TBI symptoms are pretty much the same as other brain injuries, right? That could be dementia, that could be Alzheimer's, it could be any number of things, right? The brain tends to pretty much present itself within variations of the same thing over and over. So you go into the VA and you're like, man, I'm just so depressed. And the VA is like, oh, you need a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is going to cause you all kinds of other life problems. And so they prescribe you this SRI, and you actually don't need that. What you need is actually more tyrosine so that you can make more dopamine. Right. So it could really be that simple. So what I tell people, and again, not a doctor, not a medical professional in any type of way, just from a personal experience, is get your neurotransmitters up to the levels that they need to be, right? That could be by taking any number of things, right? Obviously, we're here to talk about Go pills. And so starting with something like Go pills and just doing that for 10 days and then saying, okay, did the symptoms get better? Did they get worse? Did they stay the same? If they got worse, you got bigger problems. If they got better, well, now you know that at least part of your problem is neurotransmitter related, maybe nutrient delivery related. And if they stayed the same, well, now you know it's probably not a neurotransmitter issue and there's something else that you need to deal with.
Let me say one. Go ahead.
The fact of the matter is we have much more control than we think we do. We just need to engage it, right? We live in a culture where you are just going to grow up and maybe get Alzheimer's. You will probably get cancer. You will insert whatever degenerative or fatal disease, quote unquote, happens to you at the end of life. Again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not putting you two in a position to say that this will cure these things as you've said, but I think it's important to reiterate that you have more control over your own body and your own health than you've been led to believe. Your body is a complex system. You need to engage in integrated systems that will provide you the best foundation possible to either fight that disease or potentially put yourself in a position to be less prone to those diseases instead of just waiting for life to happen to you when you hit X age.
Yeah, give your body every advantage, basically. And that means sleep. That means use your brain. That means eat healthy, right? That means surround yourself with good people. That means supplement correctly. That means all of those things. It is holistic. It's not, I can misbehave in 4 out of the 5 sectors, but if I do 5 really conscientiously, all will be well. It really is about, look, life is an amazing gift. And when you think of it in those terms, why not do everything you possibly can to protect the system, the amazing machine? The brain, of course, is just part of the body. But the more you study the brain, I have a family member who's a rock star neurologist. I think I alluded to him. And he always talks about brain mechanisms and so forth. And he's a brilliant human being. And then when you say, so just break it down. How does the brain actually work? He'll describe what we've talked about, right? Which is neurotransmitters, and you got signaling, you got brain waves, measurable things. And now with this amazing technology that we have now, we can really track through certain kinds of MRIs activity at given moments. But then when you ask one of these brain busters, like what's a memory? Basically the answer is, nobody knows. So there's so much mystery and beauty involved in the way the brain works. Don't pretend that you can figure it all out, but give it every advantage based on what we do know. And that goes for everything when it comes to mental health, right? Because brain function is a key part of mental health. But so is the chemistry. The chemistry is a big part of giving your brain the capacity to work at an optimized level so that you can then deal with some of the other things that are hitting you hard over the course of a lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there has been an interesting cultural shift as nootropics have become more ubiquitous, and all of these. I remember listening to an episode that Joe Rogan did one time where he had a vegan and a carnivore diet person. He moderated a debate between the two of them, and it was interesting. And I'm a nerd on diet stuff, kind of the way that you two are on neuroscience and things like that. The main takeaway that I had from that moderated debate was, as long as you're not eating the standard American diet and doing the things that you've been led to believe you should be doing for the last 30 years, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape, right? And I'm not here to disparage vegans or here to disparage the carnivores. It's just to illustrate the point that think for yourself, take initiative, take responsibility, go on offense, live your life on purpose, right? Like, life doesn't just happen to you. You are able to happen to your life. And again, we need to leave room for the mystery. We need to leave room for, some of the things that are going to happen that aren't great, but that is a part of life. And you need to be best prepared for that as much as you can. And so you have so much more control than you think. Don't just let these things and these fads happen and just blindly follow these things. Think for yourself, go on offense, take responsibility.
Also, try for yourself. What you just said is 100% correct. And try for yourself. Two things I'd say is, number one, beware.
Oh, no.
Our AI overlords don't like this conversation. They want to do everything for us. Shutting us down. So the try piece is really important, because if you hear whatever, right? Somebody tells you that they have a good experience with something, or somebody tells you they have a bad experience with something. That doesn't necessarily mean that bad experience applies to you. So I'll talk to people routinely, and people who know me and people who deployed with me know that I've been in the nootropic space for borderline 15 years now. I have tried everything. I have done a double dose of phenylparacetam stacked with cat's claw and lion's mane, and suffered the consequences of doing that. I also have, taken PT tests where I got the best possible scores I could ever possibly imagine, because I was taking phenylparacetam properly and properly cycled, and ended up cranking out 5 15-minute miles. Right. And there's a reason why that stuff specifically is outlawed by the Olympic Committee, as an example. But then again, so is too high of a dose of caffeine. So when you talk to people, somebody says, "Oh, this is bad," or "That's good." Well, try for yourself, because just because it's bad for them doesn't mean it's bad for you. Just because, like, a great example is a very, very, very small amount of people might end up, if they get too much choline, because they're a choline dominant person, will end up getting a headache if they take some nootropic supplements that have an interactive effect on choline. So that's a very, very small group of people. So just because somebody took something and said, oh man, it gave me a headache. Well, maybe there's a choline dominant person and they're a very small percentage of the population. And that means it gave them a headache. You don't know whether or not it's going to give you a headache until you try it. Right. Somebody else takes a supplement. Next thing you know, they're running 5-minute miles. Well, maybe you're naturally the strong guy, not the fast guy. So no matter what you take, you're not going to crank out 5-minute miles, but it gave you a 15% increase on your lactic threshold. Right. So you see how the trying is so important, because if you only take the anecdotal evidence of what somebody else says, this is good and that is bad, then you never all you do is end up falling into the program that's good for them, which isn't necessarily the program that's good for you. And it's also based on goals. If you're trying to be a world famous power lifter, you probably need to take things a little bit differently and do things a little bit differently than somebody who's trying to be a tech entrepreneur.
Yeah, everybody's different and every body is different, right? And so you need to take responsibility and initiative. I know the horse is dead, but I'm going to continue to beat it. You need to take responsibility and take initiative for your own body and your own life and try to understand these things. And your body's a dynamic piece of equipment that exists in a very dynamic environment. And so if you're just going to statically approach things, you're not going to succeed. And especially if you have, like you said, specific goals that lie in a specific direction in a specific arena, you need to understand what it is you're trying to achieve, and therefore what needs to go into your body and into your brain in order to help you achieve those goals.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, along those lines, one thing I wanted to add, can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to add along those lines, Nic was saying it perfectly, which is try, don't try recklessly, but try, do your own assessments. You'll know, your body will tell you. And that speaks to another topic, which is people often ask, okay, wow, look, I love it. You seem to have some of the science figured out. You share your data very transparently, wonderful. But what does it actually feel like? You're saying intelligence, you're saying reverse digit span, you're saying Raven's progressive matrices, you're saying memory. What does it feel like? All right, that's a question we get a lot. And of course, everybody will have their own experience. But for me, it feels like, Go Pills feel like a brain fog clearer. Right? So it sounds funny, but sometimes you wake up after not too much sleep with a toddler and you'll be ready to rock because you're fit. I'm physically fit, but you're ready to rock, but there's a fog, there's a weight, right? And so burning that away is immensely valuable to me, to clear away that fog. And that's one of the main benefits I feel. The other one, and this is funny and anecdotal, is after I do my Go Pills, I will work on something. And I don't know how your brain works, but my brain works this way. And I'm sure a lot of folks can relate. It's like ping, 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 ping. And I think, oh boy, you're so clever. You can ping on 12 things simultaneously. Of course, that's massively counterproductive, right? Massively counterproductive. And so after Go Pills, I'll sometimes emerge and call my wife and say, sweetheart, I can't believe it. She'll say, what? And I'll say, I just did one thing for 30 minutes. Like, I can't believe I just did one thing for 30 minutes. Like, what's going on? And she says, what's your problem? Why is that a big deal? It's a huge deal for me. So that capacity to lock on and knock it out, knock something out, and then move on, as opposed to, oh, watch, I'm pinging. I'm so productive because I'm doing 12 things simultaneously. Wrong. Like, that ability to lock on. And one other thing I wanted to share is Nic is great, because when we started talking about this and I realized that, oh my goodness, Nic, you have been at this for a really long time. You are incredibly smart in this space. I'm going to go for it because this is the way I operate. We're going to give you Go Pills and I want your honest assessment, right? That's a big part of all of this, is that everybody who tries it, we always say, we're not trying to sell you. We've built something and made something that we think is helpful. You try it and decide for yourself. So Nic tries and decides for himself before he becomes a part of this in any way. And he has to believe in what he does. I mean, if you know anything about Nic, the things he gets involved in are predicated on deep-rooted belief and conviction about the benefits that they can have, right? That's how Nic is fundamentally. And so I will say selfishly, when Nic, not that I'm insecure, but when a Nic McKinley says, I'm in, I like this, that matters to us. Like, we take that very seriously. And just recently, I have to share this. It's a bit of a brag, but I have to share it. We love to stress test, right? I talked about the cage match. We throw our own stuff in there. We want it to, live or die based on stress tests, right? And so through a friend, we had the nation's premier law enforcement tactical unit. I can't say which one. We had that unit do a multi-week on-off trial of Go pills. And it didn't come from us. I never dealt with them directly. They weren't rewarded for it. They weren't incentivized. Their human performance guy said, okay, we'd love to test it, but I have to warn you, if it sucks, you will know without a doubt that they think it sucks. We will make that very clear to you. If they like it, they'll make that clear too. And the results of this trial, right, came in, and the trial had to do with both anecdotal material, oh, I felt X, and also measurable material. So both classroom activity, executive function activity, and then training and operations where you are assessing options that we talked about earlier, making a decision, right? Tactical operators. And the results came in and they were astonishing. And I have to share them because I'm like a kid bursting at the seams, right? With this, report card I want to share to my parents. 15, do you mind if I share?
Please. I'm cool with it. I'm sure Nick is.
Yeah, I won't name the unit. So, but I wish I could. But so 15 of these guys used Go pills either in the morning and not in the afternoon, or on one day and not the next, right? They're kind of the on and off mechanism, so you can compare and contrast. And big overall picture, were Go pills effective? 13 of 15, so 86% of them said, yeah, it's effective. Go pills work for cognitive enhancement, mental function, decision making. And then we said, okay, break it down in terms of specific attributes, right? Focus and attention. Both anecdotal, measurable. What do you think? And 14 of 15 said, yeah, without a doubt. With respect to focus and attention, Go pills work. And that's an astonishing number in a clinical trial. 14 out of 15 people who are not predisposed. They weren't friends of mine. They were coming at it with a hard clinical, hey, this is either helpful or it's not. And 14 of 15 said, yeah, this stuff is solid when it comes to focus and attention. That's extraordinary. But that matters to us because every one of those data points, we take that into consideration. And if all of them came back and said, your product is garbage, we would reassess, right? But all along this sequence, all along this chronology of this new venture, we've had these remarkable proof points that have kind of lit us up. Because we know based on the science that it should work, but it's great when you hear it from folks who have put it to the test themselves and say, I am deriving benefit.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations. It's incredible. I would imagine that feels great, and it absolutely should. I want to wrap things up, but I want to hit your two anecdotes here kind of before we do, as we segue into the open-ended question I end each episode with. On your ping anecdote, I think that's a really, really important thing for people to think about. Creatives, entrepreneurs, people who are scaling startups, this idea that we can think of dozens of things at a time makes us feel accomplished and makes us feel cool. When in reality, it is, like you said, a detriment to the process that you're trying to engage in.
Absolutely.
Creative or entrepreneurial or whatever. The fog anecdote, I think, is a really important one. Those of us in the military, both those of us that served in conventional units and those that served in elite units, we like to believe that we can perform through the fog, and we often can perform through the fog, right? That's something that happens, and we just need to push through and accomplish the mission, whatever that set might be. Again, not something we should be doing. Just because we can doesn't mean it's something that we should. So I think alleviating the fog and eliminating the ping is a really, really important metric for people to consider as they look at what they want to supplement with.
Well, just because you can do something also doesn't mean that it's healthy for you to do it. So like I can drive through fog where I can't see the front of my truck, but that doesn't mean that that's a good idea for me to do that. I can continue to operate after not sleeping for 3 days, but that doesn't mean that's a good idea for me to do that. So just because you can do something, well, that's great to know. Reserve that for the times when you have no other choice, but make a better choice in the interim. And so that's, I can focus on nothing but work all day, every day to the detriment of my family, right? I can focus on just my family to the detriment of my work. So I think oftentimes we think that just because we can do something, we should. And there's this concept that a lot of entrepreneurs are very familiar with, called the curse of competence. And because we always have people saying, oh, you're good at this, you should do that, and you should do this. And they don't realize that there are people who are kind of only good at a couple of things. So what they're going to do is kind of predetermined because they're only good at a couple of things. And then there are people who are good at lots of things. There's a PJ that I served with, a guy named, we'll just call him Dirty Mike. Dirty Mike, if you're listening, you're welcome. He was the best out of the box shooter on the team. We would train to be able to shoot as well as he could on like a hungover Saturday. He was the fastest guy on the team. He was always crushing our PT tests. He was a guy who naturally just had the ability to kind of do anything. And so as a result, people were, especially our leadership, was constantly throwing things at him, telling him he should do this, he should do that, he should do that, versus some of this other, mere mortals like myself, kind of only good at a couple of things. And so those were the things that we tended to focus on and get good at. As a result, he never got to be the person who ever focused on something and really got good at that one thing because he was just spread too thin. And so where I think something like Go Pills really helps out is when you talk about removing the fog, really what we're saying is it gives you clarity of thought so that, again, the prop, the turbine, the wheel, whatever analogy you want to use, isn't spinning too fast. Because when things move too fast, they stop producing power. And so you actually need to be able to slow things down a little bit in order to be able to perform at your optimal level.
That's true. Yep.
And the pinging is things moving too fast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. I think that's as good a place as any to wrap things up. Before we get into the open-ended question, where can folks find Go Pills? Where can folks find you both and the product? Where do you want to drive traffic? What can I tag?
I think the main answer to that question is gopills.com. Gopills.com has virtually all of the data we've talked about, access to all of it. You can also get the pills there. It's the primary place to get Go Pills. So it is the retail outlet. It's also the information hub.
Yep, and I think we're working on a discount code for the audience, so we'll link that in the show notes and all of the pieces of content that we post across Instagram and LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
So tag the account, the Instagram account, and all that good stuff. Okay, Christian, you might not know this, but we end each episode with an open-ended question. What's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice. Could be something you want to get off your chest, or it could be something you want to reiterate from what we've talked about today. But Christian, we'll start with you. What's on your heart? What's on your mind?
What's on my heart? What's on my mind? With respect to your community, I'd say that before I was cut off previously, I was saying, beware extremity, right? So here we are, we're talking about Go Pills. I believe in it. It's a product. I'm hyper enthusiastic. Trust your own instincts, analyze it, come at it critically, as with everything, and calmly assess. Nick is very good at making sure that assessments of things are calm and practical and not spastic, right? So calmly assess this product just like you would everything else in your life. I actually wrote a book with a friend of mine about a guy. He's a tier 1 operator, and a lot of folks thought it was going to be about razzle dazzle rah rah, isn't he a ninja? And what it really was about his struggles and the difficulty of it, and candor, right? And just slowing down, and the gift of slowing down and honestly assessing where you are in life, or in a problem, or in a process, or in a relationship. And this is, beyond the scope of supplements, obviously, but that's something that's on my heart and my mind in my own life. And with respect to friends, which is to calmly and clearly look at something with intention and compassion and critique, and assess it sincerely, if that makes sense. What I notice, and this goes back to the pinging thing, one of the things we do so much in this day and age is, even with respect to a startup, is we live in a resume society. right? Where, I want to present all the positives. It's all positive all the time. By the way, let me just say, this startup is kicking butt and it's awesome, and Go Pills will rock. It has challenges galore. It's not all roses. I mean, it's a lot of roses, but it's not all roses, right? Nothing is. And I myself have had to grapple with that and come to terms with that because I'm a very positive person. And somebody the other day said something to me. I know I'm riffing a bit here, but bear with me. Someone's like, gosh, Christian, you're so lucky, man. Everything works for you. And I went bonkers. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, for 2 things to work, 3 have died a horrible, horrible death. And they're like, no, everything goes your way. Everything you touch turns to gold. I was like, dude, 1, I'm mad at you, but now I'm not mad at you. Maybe I'm mad at myself because maybe I present that to you and I haven't taken the time to be completely candid about all the struggles that undergird whatever success you might think you see. So I'm very much on this kick now about candor, ditch the resume society. With your startup, ditch it, right? Be honest about how it's going and your challenges. With your relationship, ditch it. With your life, ditch it. With your career, ditch it. Get to candor as fast as you can. It's extraordinarily healing and soothing. It's one of the best bombs I've encountered.
Well said. Nic, what about you, sir? What's on your heart? What's on your mind for our community?
For this community is you're not your past. And if you believe that, then why do you think anybody else is their past? The veteran community specifically has got to stop pointing out that, well, somebody didn't serve in what unit, or they weren't on the black side of this target. They were on the red side and there was no action over there, or they didn't, or they weren't, or let me tell you my war stories. It's like the Highlander syndrome. There can be only one of the veteran community has got to stop. And the backstabbing and the constant telling of old war stories, like, I don't actually care what you did. Thank you for your service. What are you doing today to move the needle on a problem to make the world a better place? Because if you're not still in uniform and all you're doing is talking about the thing that you used to do, you're not actually bringing value anymore. And so, like, actually get in the trenches again. Stop just with this veteran kind of influencer mentality. Get in the trenches and actually do a thing and move the needle on a problem, either for society or for this community. And if you see somebody doing something that isn't the way that you would do it, then instead of pointing that out, maybe just sit back and see how it works out for them. And if it doesn't work out well, offer a helping hand and learn from that. But you might just find that it actually is going to work out really well, and they can actually improve not only society but improve our community writ large.
Agreed. Maybe if you have concerns, that means you have questions, and you should ask questions. The one of the most important things I've learned as an adult is from my wife, which is lead with questions. If you have a concern, It probably means you have a question. Ask a question, or keep your mouth shut and observe. But your 2 options that you should start with are being quiet or asking questions. Then you can get into a spot where you can maybe make some statements and have a back and forth.
Right.
Awesome. Fellas, appreciate this. This has been great. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your energy. Thanks for the Go Pills. And very excited to put this out in the world.
Awesome. Thank you, Carey.